3 weeks. That's all the time I had left before my first flight, and honestly, I was a complete mess. Every night I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with 1,000 what-ifs. What if the plane crashes? What if I have a panic attack at 30,000 feet? What if I embarrass myself in front of all those experienced travelers? My friends thought I was being dramatic. Sarah, millions of people fly every single day, my best friend Emma would say, rolling her eyes. You're more likely to get hurt driving to the grocery store. But statistics didn't calm my racing heart or stop my palms from sweating every time I thought about being trapped in a metal tube hurtling through the sky. I became obsessed with research. YouTube videos about flight safety, articles explaining how planes work, forums where nervous flyers shared their experiences. I learned about turbulence, about how pilots train for years, about backup systems and safety protocols. The more I read, the more my logical brain understood that flying was safe. But my emotional brain? That was a completely different story. The trip was for my cousin's wedding in California. I'd never been to the West Coast, and part of me was genuinely excited about the adventure. But that excitement was buried under layers of anxiety that seemed to grow stronger each day. I even considered backing out entirely and sending a gift instead. My mom, bless her heart, tried to be supportive. She'd flown plenty of times for work and couldn't quite understand my fear. Honey, it's actually quite peaceful up there, she'd tell me. You'll see clouds like you've never seen them before. I wanted to believe her, but my imagination kept conjuring up disaster scenarios instead of peaceful cloud gazing. Sleep became elusive. I'd downloaded meditation apps, tried breathing exercises, even considered asking my doctor for something to calm my nerves. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was losing sleep over something that was supposed to take me to one of the happiest occasions of the year. 2 weeks before the flight, I started having dreams about planes. Sometimes they were nightmares where everything went wrong. Other times, strangely, they were beautiful dreams where I was floating peacefully above the world. I'd wake up confused, not sure which version felt more real. My coworkers began placing bets on whether I'd actually go through with it. The office pool had grown to $20, with most people betting I'd chicken out at the last minute. I pretended to laugh along, but secretly, I was starting to wonder if they might be right. 1 week out, I printed my boarding pass. Seeing my name on that piece of paper made everything feel suddenly real and terrifying. Flight 447, departure 8:15 a.m., seat 14F, window seat, another source of anxiety. Would I want to look out, or would the view make everything worse? The morning arrived faster than I wanted it to. I'd barely slept 3 hours, and my stomach felt like it was hosting a butterfly convention. My hands shook as I double-checked my carry-on for the 10th time. Phone charger? Check. ID and boarding pass? Check. The small bag of snacks my mom insisted I pack? Check. Everything I needed for what felt like the most terrifying day of my life. The drive to the airport was surreal. Every mile closer made my heart beat faster. I kept thinking about turning around, about calling my cousin and making up some excuse. Food poisoning, family emergency, anything that would get me out of this metal death trap situation I'd committed myself to. But then I was there, standing in front of the massive terminal building, watching planes take off in the distance. They looked so graceful, so effortless. People were walking around me like this was the most normal thing in the world, which I guess it was for them. Check-in was surprisingly smooth. The airline representative was friendly and patient, even when I asked probably too many questions about the weather conditions and flight path. She smiled and assured me it would be a beautiful day for flying. I wanted to ask her how she could be so certain, but I just nodded and took my updated boarding pass. Security was its own adventure. I'd watched enough movies to expect chaos, but it was actually quite organized. The TSA agents were professional, and I found myself oddly comforted by their thoroughness. If they were checking everything this carefully, surely they knew what they were doing. Sitting at the gate, I became a people watcher. Families with small children who seemed completely unfazed by the prospect of flying. Business travelers typing away on laptops like they were in any ordinary waiting room. Elderly couples holding hands, probably heading to visit grandchildren. Everyone looked so calm, so normal. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, pressed her face against the window watching planes taxi by. "Look, Mommy! That one's so big!" she squealed with delight. Her excitement was infectious. And for a moment, I felt a tiny spark of curiosity instead of pure terror. The boarding announcement came too soon. Now boarding all passengers for Flight 447 to Los Angeles. My legs felt like jelly as I stood up. This was it. No more delays, no more time to change my mind. I was really doing this. Walking down the jet bridge felt like walking toward my destiny. The flight attendants greeted everyone with genuine smiles, and I noticed how confident and calm they seemed. These people did this every single day. They wouldn't be here if it wasn't safe, right? Finding seat 14F was easy enough. Window seat? Just as I'd feared and secretly hoped for. My hands were trembling as I stowed my carry-on and sat down. The plane felt solid, sturdy, not at all like the fragile contraption I'd imagined. The next 30 minutes felt like a lifetime. Passengers filed in around me, and I watched their faces for any signs of concern. Nothing. Just people settling in for what they clearly considered a routine journey. A businessman in the aisle seat smiled and nodded as he sat down, immediately pulling out his tablet like he was settling into his living room. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration, and I hung on every word. Emergency exits, oxygen masks, life vests, things I'd seen in movies but never paid attention to. Now every detail felt crucial. The woman demonstrating looked so composed, so practiced. How many times had she done this? Thousands? The thought was oddly reassuring. Then came the announcement that made my stomach drop. Flight attendants, prepare for departure. The engines started with a low rumble that I felt in my chest. This was happening. There was no backing out now. I gripped the armrest so tightly my knuckles turned white. We began moving, slowly at first, taxiing toward the runway. I pressed my face to the window, watching the ground crew wave us along. Everything looked so organized, so professional. These people knew exactly what they were doing. The businessman next to me was already reading emails, completely unbothered by the fact that we were about to defy gravity. "First time flying?" he asked, noticing my death grip on the armrests. I nodded, probably looking as terrified as I felt. "You picked a great day for it," he said kindly. "Clear skies, smooth conditions. You're going to love the view once we get up there." The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and confident. "Good morning, folks. We've got beautiful weather ahead of us today, smooth sailing all the way to Los Angeles. Flight time will be about 5.5 hours. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride." Relax. Right. Easy for him to say from his pilot seat with years of training and experience. But something about his voice was genuinely calming. He sounded like someone who'd done this a million times and was completely in control. We turned onto the runway, and my heart started racing again. The engines grew louder, more powerful. I could feel the plane gathering speed faster and faster. The ground outside my window became a blur. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading for weeks. And then, something magical happened. The nose of the plane lifted, and suddenly, we were airborne. The sensation was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the violent, terrifying experience I'd imagined, it felt smooth, almost gentle, like being in an elevator, but somehow more graceful. I looked out the window and gasped. The world below was transforming into a patchwork quilt of fields and roads and tiny houses. Cars looked like toys. People were invisible dots. We climbed higher, and I watched my fears literally shrink away beneath us. "Beautiful, isn't it?" the businessman said, smiling at my obvious amazement. I could only nod, too stunned to speak. This wasn't terrifying at all. This was absolutely incredible. 20 minutes into the flight, I realized I hadn't thought about crashing once since takeoff. Instead, I was completely mesmerized by the view outside my window. We'd climbed above a layer of puffy white clouds that looked like cotton balls scattered across a blue canvas. The sun was hitting them just right, creating shadows and highlights that no photograph could ever capture. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, though I knew they wouldn't do justice to what I was seeing. The businessman chuckled. "First-timer photos never turn out quite right, but you have to try anyway," he said. I still remember my first flight 30 years ago. Spent the whole time with my face pressed against the window just like you're doing now. The flight attendant came by with drinks, and I ordered a ginger ale. My hands finally steady enough to hold a cup without spilling. She noticed my excitement and leaned down conspiratorially. "First flight?" When I nodded, she grinned. "I love seeing first-timers discover how amazing this really is. Wait until you see the mountains coming up. They're spectacular today." She was right. About an hour later, mountain peaks began emerging from the clouds like islands in a white sea. I'd seen mountains before, but never from this perspective. They looked ancient and majestic, their snow-covered peaks catching the sunlight. I found myself thinking about all the people who'd never see this view, who were too afraid to take that first step onto a plane. I started writing notes on my phone, trying to capture not just what I was seeing, but how it felt. The sense of freedom, of being suspended between earth and sky. The realization that my weeks of anxiety had been completely unnecessary. The growing excitement about sharing this experience with others who might be struggling with the same fears I'd had. "You know," I said to my seatmate, "I was terrified about this flight for weeks. I barely slept, researched every possible thing that could go wrong, almost didn't come at all." He nodded knowingly. Fear of the unknown is natural. But look at you now. You're a natural flyer. I bet you'll be booking your next trip before you even land. The thought made me laugh because it was probably true. I was already thinking about all the places I could go, all the views I could see from up here. How had I lived 28 years without experiencing this? Lunch service came and went, and I found myself actually enjoying the airplane food. Something I'd heard was impossible. Everything tasted better at 35,000 feet. Or maybe I was just high on the endorphins of conquering my biggest fear. I started drafting a social media post in my head, wanting to share this transformation with my friends and followers. Not just the pretty pictures, but the real story. The fear, the anxiety, the incredible moment when terror turned into wonder. Maybe my experience could help someone else take that leap. The captain announced we'd begin our descent soon, and I felt a pang of disappointment. I wasn't ready for this magical experience to end. The descent into Los Angeles was just as smooth as everything else had been. Watching the city grow larger below us, seeing the intricate network of highways and neighborhoods spread out like a living map, I felt a sense of accomplishment that surprised me. I'd done it. I'd actually flown across the country, and not only had I survived, I'd loved every minute of it. Landing felt like a gentle bump, nothing more dramatic than a bus hitting a small pothole. The passengers around me started gathering their belongings like this was the most ordinary thing in the world, which I guess it was for them. But for me, it felt like I'd just completed a personal marathon. "Congratulations on your first flight," the businessman said as we waited to deplane. "You're officially part of the club now." I thanked him for his kindness throughout the journey, realizing that his casual conversation had helped keep me calm during those first crucial minutes. Walking through LAX, I felt different somehow. More confident, more adventurous. I'd faced my biggest fear and discovered it was actually one of life's most beautiful experiences. The wedding could wait. I had a story to tell. Sitting in my hotel room that evening, I crafted what I thought would be a simple social media post about overcoming fear. I shared the honest truth, the sleepless nights, the research binges, the moment I almost backed out entirely. Then I described the reality, the professionalism of the crew, the smoothness of the flight, the absolutely breathtaking views that no amount of anxiety could have prepared me for. I included some of the photos I'd taken, though they barely captured the majesty of what I'd seen. I wrote about the kindness of strangers, the realization that millions of people do this safely every day, and the regret I felt for waiting so long to experience something so incredible. I hit post and went to bed, exhausted but exhilarated by the day's events. I woke up to my phone buzzing constantly. Overnight, my post had been shared hundreds of times. My inbox was flooded with messages from people sharing their own first flight stories, their fears, their similar transformations. Some were planning their first flights and asking for advice. Others were thanking me for putting into words exactly how they'd felt. One message particularly stood out. "I've been putting off visiting my daughter across the country for 2 years because I'm terrified of flying. Your post gave me the courage to book my ticket. Thank you for being so honest about your fear and showing that it's possible to overcome it." By the end of the week, my post had reached thousands of people. Travel bloggers were sharing it, airlines were commenting with encouragement, and a whole community of nervous flyers had formed in the comments section, supporting each other and sharing tips. I realized I'd stumbled onto something bigger than just my personal story. There were countless people out there letting fear keep them from experiences, from loved ones, from adventures. My simple honesty about conquering that fear had created a ripple effect I never could have imagined.